When Little Eagle, a 12-year-old Comanche boy, looked into the eyes of his own brothers on that blood-stained morning of 1880, he never could have imagined that it would be the last day of his childhood, and that his life was about to take a turn that would forever change not only his destiny, but that of everyone around him in ways no one could predict. It was a cold October morning when it all began. The sun had barely risen over the infinite plains of Texas, and Little Eagle was already awake, as he always did, studying the stars that still shone faintly in the sky. This boy was not like the others in the Comanche tribe. While boys his age played with bows and arrows, Little Eagle devoured any piece of written paper he could find in the abandoned camps of white men. His father, Chief Standing Bear, the respected leader of the tribe, watched with a mixture of pride and concern this extraordinary son. Little Eagle could do complex mathematical calculations using only sticks in the dirt, spoke English fluently even though he had never left the reservation, and had a wisdom in his words that amazed even the most experienced elders. "One day, my son," Chief Standing Bear would say, "your mind will be your greatest weapon, more powerful than any rifle or war horse." Little Eagle had two older brothers, Running Bear, 17 years old, and Grey Wolf, 20. Both were skilled warriors, respected by the tribe, but they constantly lived in the shadow of their younger brother. While they excelled only in hunting and combat skills, Little Eagle impressed everyone with his ability to solve complex problems and his vision beyond his years. Envy, that poisonous serpent, had begun to poison the hearts of Running Bear and Grey Wolf long before that fateful morning. But what happened on that October day would forever change not only Little Eagle's life, but the destiny of all of Texas. And those responsible for this tragedy would pay a price they never imagined possible. The night before, Running Bear and Grey Wolf had secretly met with Thomas Caldwell, a cattle magnate known for his cruelty and greed. Caldwell had a gigantic ranch about 50 miles south of the reservation and was always looking for cheap labor. He had heard rumors about an extraordinarily intelligent Comanche boy and saw a golden opportunity. "Listen well," said Caldwell, his small pig-like eyes gleaming with greed. "This brother of yours could be very useful to me. An Indian who can read and do math is worth a fortune. I can teach him to manage my business, and you two each get $300. More money than you've seen in your entire lives." $300 in 1880 was an astronomical sum for young Native Americans. It was enough to buy horses, weapons, and even land. Running Bear and Grey Wolf looked at each other, and in that look sealed the terrible fate of their younger brother. "He won't suffer," Caldwell lied. "He'll have food, a clean bed, and will learn the white man's business. Actually, we're doing him a favor." But Little Eagle knew nothing of this when he woke up that October morning. He was doing what he always did at dawn, observing the sky and reflecting on the lessons his father had taught him the night before. "Running Bear, Grey Wolf," Little Eagle called out when he saw his brothers approaching. "Come see. Today's stars form the same pattern that Grandfather Great Eagle taught us. It's a sign of change, of—" "Little Eagle," Running Bear interrupted, his voice strangely tense. "We need to talk to you." The boy turned around and for the first time noticed something different in his brother's eyes. There was a coldness there, a hardness he had never seen before. Grey Wolf avoided his gaze, nervously staring at the ground. "What happened?" asked Little Eagle, his sharp intelligence already detecting that something was terribly wrong. "Nothing happened," said Grey Wolf, finally raising his eyes. We just have a proposal for you." And then they told him. They spoke about an opportunity at a rich white man's ranch. They spoke about how Little Eagle could use his intelligence to help his family. They spoke about money and better living conditions. But Little Eagle was not just intelligent, He was wise beyond his years, and in the way his brothers spoke, in how they avoided certain words, in the tension that hung in the air like toxic smoke, he understood exactly what was happening. "You're selling me," said Little Eagle, his voice too calm for a 12-year-old child. "My own brothers are selling me like cattle." The silence that followed was more deafening than any war cry. Running Bear and Grey Wolf could no longer hide the truth. Their faces were the confession Little Eagle needed. "Little Eagle," Running Bear began, but the boy cut him off. "Don't say anything. Don't try to justify. You've already chosen." Little Eagle stood up slowly, his small figure rising against the golden horizon of dawn. "But I want you to remember one thing. One day when you need help, when you're desperate and without options, remember this moment. Remember that you had the chance to have a brother, and you chose to have money." These words, coming from a 12-year-old child, fell upon Running Bear and Grey Wolf like heavy stones. But greed had already poisoned their hearts beyond the point of return. 3 hours later, Little Eagle was sitting in the back of a wagon, his small hands tied, watching his tribe, his family, his entire life disappear in the dust of the road. Thomas Caldwell was beside him, laughing loudly and counting the money he had given to the traitorous brothers. "Don't worry, boy," said Caldwell, not realizing the dark irony of his words. "You're going to have a good life with me. You'll learn to be a real businessman." Little Eagle didn't respond. He just looked at the horizon and made a silent promise to himself, a promise that would shape the next 25 years of his life and forever change the destiny of everyone involved in this betrayal. Thomas Caldwell's ranch was an empire of cruelty, disguised as prosperity. Spread across thousands of acres, the property employed dozens of workers, most of them in conditions that bordered on slavery. Caldwell had made his fortune exploiting both the land and people, and saw no moral problem with it. Martha Caldwell, his wife, was a 50-year-old woman with a surprisingly kind heart, completely incompatible with her husband's nature. When she saw Thomas arriving with a clearly traumatized Native American child, something inside her broke. "Thomas, what is this?" asked Martha, her hands trembling as she saw the ropes binding Little Eagle's wrists. "Business, Martha. This boy is special. He's going to make us a lot of money." But when Martha looked into Little Eagle's eyes, she didn't see merchandise. She saw a wounded child, betrayed by his own brothers, torn from everything he knew and loved. And in that moment, Martha Caldwell made a decision that would change everything. That first night, when Thomas had already gone out to drink with his foreman, Martha approached the small barn where Little Eagle had been locked up. "Child," she whispered through the door, "are you all right?" "Why do you care?" replied Little Eagle, his voice still laden with pain but without anger. "I'm just your husband's property now." Martha slowly opened the door. Little Eagle was sitting in the corner, looking through the small window at the stars. Even in the most desperate situation of his life, he still found solace in the wisdom of the sky. "What's your real name?" asked Martha, sitting beside him. "Little Eagle. But I suspect that doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to me." Martha extended a piece of bread and a cup of warm milk. "And it matters to you. Never let anyone take away your name, your identity. No matter how difficult your situation, you're still who you are." This conversation was the beginning of something extraordinary. Martha Caldwell, without her husband knowing, began visiting Little Eagle every night. She brought books, paper, pencils. She discovered that the boy had an insatiable thirst for knowledge that went far beyond his age. "Do you know how to do math?" asked Martha one night a few weeks later. "I know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide," replied Little Eagle. "My father taught me using stones and sticks." Martha then showed him more complex math problems. She was shocked when Little Eagle solved equations that some adults with formal education would have difficulty with. "My God," she whispered, "you're a genius. My father said that Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, gave me this gift for some reason," said Little Eagle. "But now I don't know what that reason is anymore." During the day, Little Eagle worked under the orders of Caldwell's foreman. Initially, they treated him like common manual labor, but they soon realized that the boy had unique abilities. He could quickly calculate how many head of cattle would fit in each pasture, how much feed would be needed for the horses, what the exact costs of each ranch operation were. Joshua Mitchell, the ranch's oldest foreman, a 45-year-old black man who had grown up in slavery and earned his freedom through hard work, was the first to recognize Little Eagle's potential. "Boy," said Joshua one afternoon, after seeing Little Eagle solve in minutes a logistics problem that had confused the workers for days, "you have a gift that can change your life, but you need to be smart about how you use that gift." "What do you mean?" asked Little Eagle. "I mean that men like Caldwell are going to try to use you, but if you're smart, one day you might be able to use them too. Learn everything you can. Absorb every piece of knowledge about business, money, properties, laws. One day you might need all of that." Little Eagle looked at Joshua with renewed interest. Here was someone who had gone through his own journey of suffering and transformation. Someone who understood what it meant to be another man's property and still keep alive the flame of dignity. "Can you teach me?" asked Little Eagle. "I can teach you to survive," replied Joshua. "The rest you'll have to learn on your own." And so began Little Eagle's true education. During the day, he absorbed knowledge about commercial operations, land management, cattle raising, transportation logistics. At night, Martha continued giving him books and teaching advanced mathematics, history, geography, and even rudiments of law. But Little Eagle's deepest transformation didn't come through books or numbers. It came through silent observation of human nature in its rawest form. He saw how Thomas Caldwell treated his workers, especially those who had no power to defend themselves. He saw how greed could completely corrode a man's soul. He saw how power without compassion became a tool of destruction. But he also saw unexpected kindness in Martha, who risked her husband's wrath to show gentleness to a child. He saw unshakable dignity in Joshua, who maintained his humanity even after decades of oppression. He saw how true strength didn't come from muscles or weapons, but from unbreakable principles. And as the months turned into years, Little Eagle began to develop something his captors never expected, a deep understanding of how the world really worked. He was learning not just about business and numbers, but about power, influence, and the complex motivations that moved people. Each day brought new lessons about survival, strategy, and the delicate art of transforming adversity into opportunity. At 15, 3 years after his forced arrival at the Caldwell Ranch, Little Eagle had become indispensable to the property's operations. His mathematically precise brain had identified dozens of ways to increase efficiency and reduce costs. His ability to read people had given him valuable insights into negotiations and business partnerships. Thomas Caldwell, who initially saw Little Eagle only as cheap labor, now consulted him on almost all important ranch decisions. What Caldwell didn't realize was that Little Eagle was silently mapping the entire financial and legal structure of his empire. "Boy," said Caldwell one spring morning in 1883, "you have a knack for business, better than most white men I know." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," replied Little Eagle, his voice maintaining the respectful tone he had perfected over the years. "I'm thinking of giving you more responsibilities, maybe even a small percentage of the profits." Little Eagle nodded gratefully, but inside, his mind was processing much deeper implications. Caldwell was inadvertently offering him legal entry into the white man's business world. It was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. That night, Martha came to see him as she always did, but this time she brought something different: legal documents. "Little Eagle," she said, her voice laden with an emotion he couldn't identify, "I spoke with a lawyer in Austin about your situation." Little Eagle felt his heart accelerate. And what did he say? He said that what my husband did was illegal. Buying a person, even from members of their own family, is a crime. You could sue and win your freedom. Little Eagle took the documents and studied them carefully. His self-taught education had included basic principles of law, and he understood exactly what Martha was offering. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Martha hesitated, then spoke with brutal honesty. "Because in the last 3 years I've seen you transform from a wounded child into an extraordinary young man. You have the potential to be someone important, someone who can make a difference in the world. And because I never had children, and somehow strangely you've become like a son to me." These words touched something deep in Little Eagle. For the first time in 3 years, he felt a genuine human connection, something that his brother's betrayal had almost destroyed in his heart. But Little Eagle had learned to think strategically, and his response completely surprised Martha. "I'm not going to use these documents," he said calmly. "What? Why?" "Because if I escape now, I'll just be a young Native American in a world that doesn't accept me. I won't have resources, connections, or real power to change anything. But if I stay, if I keep learning, if I build my position from within the system." Little Eagle paused, and Martha saw in his eyes a determination that haunted her. "One day I won't just be free, I'll be powerful." Martha remained silent for a long moment, processing the wisdom and calculating coldness in the words of a 15-year-old. "And what will you do with that power when you get it?" she asked. Little Eagle looked out the window at the stars, as he always did when he needed to find the right words. "I'll make sure no child goes through what I went through, and I'll give people like Joshua, like you, like all the oppressed I've met here, the chance to have dignified lives." He paused, and his next sentence was said with a serenity that didn't match his age. "And one day, when my brothers come looking for help, because they will come, life has a way of collecting on our choices. I'll have to decide if I'm better than them." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. There was something almost prophetic in the way Little Eagle spoke, as if he were seeing a future that was still hidden from the rest of the world. And he was indeed seeing. Because Little Eagle had inherited more than intelligence from his Comanche lineage, he had inherited an almost supernatural intuition about the patterns of human life, about how past actions inevitably return to confront us in the future. The next 10 years passed like a silent hurricane of growth and transformation. Little Eagle, who now used the name Samuel Whitehorse in his dealings with the white world, had become much more than an employee of the Caldwell Ranch. He had become a de facto partner, although officially he was still considered Thomas's property. At 22, Samuel had identified and developed business opportunities that tripled the ranch's income. He had established innovative trade routes, negotiated lucrative contracts with expanding railroads, and even invested in real estate speculation in emerging cities like Dallas and Houston. Thomas Caldwell was increasingly dependent on Samuel's brilliant mind, but also increasingly uncomfortable with this dependence. It was humiliating for a rich white man to admit that his success depended on someone he officially owned as property. "Samuel," said Thomas one afternoon in 1890, "I think it's time we formalize our partnership." Samuel looked up from the account books he was studying. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're no longer well, you know, you're a businessman. I want to make you an official partner. 20% of the company. 20%. After 10 years building Thomas Caldwell's empire, the man was offering 20%. Samuel smiled internally, but his expression remained neutral. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Caldwell, but I need to think about it." "Think? About what?" "About whether 20% is enough for what I have in mind." Samuel's response left Thomas visibly uncomfortable. There was something in the young man's voice, a silent confidence that suggested he no longer saw himself as anyone's subordinate. That night, Samuel sought out Joshua Mitchell, who was now his closest friend and informal advisor. "Joshua," said Samuel, "the time has come." "Time for what?" "To show Caldwell who really runs this ranch." Joshua laughed, but there was nervousness in his laughter. "Boy, you're playing with fire. Caldwell may be dependent on you, but he still has legal power, and he has powerful friends." "I know," Samuel replied calmly. "That's why I'm not going to confront him directly. I'm going to do something much more effective." "What?" Samuel picked up a pile of documents he had been organizing for months. "I'm going to buy him." Joshua looked at the documents without understanding. "What do you mean, buy?" "In the last 5 years, I've identified all of Caldwell's debts, all the loans, all the financial obligations. He's much more leveraged than he admits, even to himself, and I have enough investments to buy all those debts." Joshua remained silent, processing the magnitude of what Samuel was saying. "You're telling me that I'm saying that in 6 months, I'm going to be Thomas Caldwell's main creditor, and if he can't pay, which he won't be able to, I'm going to be the new owner of the Caldwell Ranch." The strategic coldness with which Samuel said this haunted even Joshua, who had seen the young man grow from a traumatized child into a ruthless businessman. "And Martha?" asked Joshua. "She's always been good to you." "Martha will be protected. She'll have a comfortable house and a lifetime income. Caldwell will learn what it means to be another man's property." And so in the winter of 1890, Samuel Whitehorse executed a financial coup so elegant and devastating that it became legend in Texas business circles. In a series of apparently independent moves, he acquired control of all of Thomas Caldwell's significant debts. When Caldwell finally understood what had happened, it was too late. The young man he had bought as property now completely controlled his financial destiny. "This is impossible," Caldwell shouted when Samuel presented the documents. You are... "I am what, Thomas?" asked Samuel, deliberately using his first name. "Your property? Your employee? Or your new boss?" The moment of realization on Thomas Caldwell's face was something Samuel had imagined thousands of times over the years, but when it finally happened, he felt less satisfaction than he had expected. Instead, he felt a kind of emptiness, as if an important part of his journey had come to an end without bringing the completeness he sought. "What do you want?" asked Caldwell, his voice now reduced to a defeated whisper. "I want justice," replied Samuel, "but not revenge. You're going to work for me for the next 5 years. You're going to learn what it means to be another man's property. After that, if you've learned anything about human dignity, I might consider giving you a second chance." It was 1891, and Samuel Whitehorse, at 23, had become one of the richest and most influential men in Texas. But his story was just beginning, because all this power building was not an end in itself. It was just a tool for a much greater purpose. And that purpose was about to be tested in a way that not even Samuel had anticipated. Samuel Whitehorse had transformed into what people called the King of Texas. At 28 in 1896, he controlled an empire that included cattle ranches, railroads, banks, and real estate properties in almost every major city in the state. But unlike other magnates of his era, Samuel operated with principles that both disconcerted and inspired. He paid fair wages to all his workers. He created schools for employees' children. He established healthcare programs decades before this became common. And most shocking for the time, he hired and promoted people based on competence, not skin color or origin. Samuel Whitehorse doesn't do business, his competitors said. He does justice. But Samuel knew that his true strength didn't come from his wealth. It came from something he had learned on that terrible morning when his own brothers sold him: the power to transform pain into purpose. Joshua Mitchell, now 58 years old, had become Samuel's right-hand man and most trusted advisor. Martha Caldwell lived comfortably in a house Samuel had bought for her in Austin and visited the ranch regularly. Thomas Caldwell had completed his 5 years of service and now managed a small property that Samuel had given him, a demonstration of forgiveness that confused many people. "Why didn't you just destroy Caldwell?" asked a Dallas journalist during a rare interview Samuel granted. "Because destroying people doesn't build anything," Samuel replied. "I learned that true victory isn't making your enemies suffer. It's becoming so successful that they can no longer hurt you, and so wise that you no longer want to hurt them." These words spread through Texas like wildfire in dry grass. Samuel Whitehorse had become not just a successful businessman, but a kind of practical philosopher, someone whose words carried moral weight beyond economic influence. But the universe was about to test whether Samuel really lived according to his own words. It was a September morning in 1905 when Joshua entered Samuel's office with an expression that the magnate immediately recognized as problematic. "Samuel," said Joshua, "we have visitors, 2 Comanche men. They say they need to speak urgently with you." Samuel felt something cold run down his spine. 25 years had passed since he had left his tribe. During all this time, he had maintained discreet contact with some members, sending money and help when needed, but always through intermediaries. He had never returned personally. "Did they give names?" asked Samuel, although his heart already knew the answer. "Running Bear and Grey Wolf," said Joshua. "They said they're my brothers," Samuel completed, his voice cold as winter wind. Joshua carefully observed Samuel's reaction. In the 15 years he had worked with him, Joshua had never seen this expression on his boss's face. It was a mixture of old pain, controlled anger, and something deeper he couldn't identify. "Do you want me to send them away?" asked Joshua. Samuel remained silent for a long moment, looking through his office window at the lands he now owned. Lands that extended far beyond the horizon, lands that represented power and influence his brothers couldn't even imagine. "No," he finally said. "Send them in, but stay nearby." "Are you sure?" Samuel turned to Joshua, and his expression had changed to something his friend recognized: absolute determination. "Joshua, 25 years ago I made a promise to myself, a promise about what I would do when this moment came. The time has come to discover what kind of man I've become." 10 minutes later, Running Bear and Grey Wolf entered Samuel's office. They were clearly older, with graying hair and faces marked by years, but they were still strong men. They wore typical settler clothes, trying to fit into the white man's world. What they didn't expect was to see a man impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, sitting behind a polished mahogany desk in an office that screamed power and sophistication. This was not the 12-year-old boy they had sold. This was clearly a very important man. "Sir," said Running Bear hesitantly, "we're from the Comanche tribe. We're looking for the most powerful man in this region. They say it's Mr. Whitehorse." Samuel studied them in silence for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. They didn't recognize him. 25 years, success, and the transformation from boy to man had changed his appearance so that his own brothers couldn't see Little Eagle in Samuel Whitehorse. "I am Samuel Whitehorse," he finally said. "How can I help you?" Grey Wolf stepped forward, clearly desperate. "Mr. Whitehorse, our tribe is in great difficulty. The government wants to remove us from our lands again. They say they found gold and need the area. They're going to send us to a reservation in Oklahoma, barren land where nothing grows. We had a younger brother," Running Bear continued, his voice laden with a sadness Samuel didn't expect to hear. "He was special, very intelligent. If he were here, maybe he could help us find a solution, but he was lost many years ago." "Lost?" asked Samuel, his voice dangerously controlled. The two brothers looked at each other, and Samuel saw something that surprised him: genuine guilt. "We did something terrible," said Grey Wolf, his words coming out like a dying man's confession. "We were young, foolish, envious. We sold our brother to a white man for money. We've spent all these years looking for him, trying to undo what we did, but you never found him," said Samuel. "Never," confirmed Running Bear, "and now our entire tribe is going to suffer, and maybe it's our punishment for having betrayed our own blood." Samuel stood up slowly and walked to the window. For a moment the office was in total silence, except for the distant sound of horses and the wind in the trees. "Tell me more about this lost brother," said Samuel without turning around. "Little Eagle," said Running Bear, and Samuel felt the name hit his heart like an arrow. He was extraordinary. He could read, do math, had a wisdom that didn't match his age. "Our father said he would be a great leader one day." "And you sold this future leader for how much?" asked Samuel, still with his back turned. $300 each," whispered Grey Wolf, shame evident in his voice. Samuel closed his eyes. $600. His own brothers had traded his entire life for $600. "Do you know how much I'm worth today?" asked Samuel, finally turning to face his brothers. "We don't know, sir," said Running Bear. "Almost $2 million, said Samuel calmly. $600 versus $2 million. Interesting calculation, don't you think? Running Bear and Grey Wolf didn't understand the significance of the comment, but something in Samuel's voice made them feel deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Whitehorse," said Grey Wolf, "can you help us? Our tribe has 400 people, women, children, elders. If we are forced to go to Oklahoma, you'll die," Samuel completed. I know the Oklahoma reservations. They're concentration camps in disguise." He returned to his desk and picked up some documents. "Fortunately for you, I have enough influence with politicians in Washington to solve this problem. I can guarantee that your tribe keeps its current lands." The faces of Running Bear and Grey Wolf lit up with hope for the first time in months. "Mr. Whitehorse, how can we thank you? How can we pay?" Samuel smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. "Oh, you've already paid. 25 years ago, you paid a price you can't even imagine." Something in Samuel's tone made the two brothers look at each other nervously. "We don't understand, sir," said Running Bear. Samuel sat down and studied them for a long moment. This was the moment he had imagined thousands of times. The moment of revelation, the moment of truth. "My real name," said Samuel slowly, "is not Samuel Whitehorse." He paused, watching confusion grow on his brothers' faces. "My real name is Little Eagle, and you are the brothers who sold me like cattle to Thomas Caldwell 25 years ago." The silence that followed was so deep that Samuel could hear his own heartbeat. Running Bear and Grey Wolf were paralyzed, their minds struggling to process what they had just heard. That's impossible," whispered Grey Wolf. "Is it?" asked Samuel, standing up. "Look at my eyes. Look at the scar on my left hand, where I cut myself with a stone when I was 10. Look at the way I move. You sold your brother, but you didn't kill him. He grew up, he learned. He became more powerful than you ever imagined possible. Running Bear began to tremble. Little Eagle, my God, what have we done? You did exactly what greed led you to do, said Samuel, his voice now laden with all the accumulated pain of 25 years. You traded your brother for money, and now you've come here, desperate, asking for help to save our tribe. And the irony is perfect. The only man with enough power to save you is the same boy you betrayed. Grey Wolf fell to his knees. Little Eagle, forgive us. You what? Samuel interrupted. You were young. You were foolish. You needed the money. He walked up to his brothers, who now looked like frightened children, instead of the strong men who had entered the office. Do you know what I went through in the first years after you sold me? Do you know how many nights I cried from loneliness? Do you know how many times I wanted to die from missing home, family, everything I loved? Samuel's words fell upon Running Bear and Grey Wolf like stones. They were finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. But do you know what hurt me most? Samuel continued. It wasn't the forced labor. It wasn't the humiliation. It was knowing that my own brothers, people I trusted with my life, saw me as merchandise. Samuel returned to his desk and sat down, observing his destroyed brothers in front of him. Now you come here desperate, asking for help to save our tribe, and the irony is perfect. The only man with enough power to save you is the one you threw away. Running Bear raised his head, tears streaming down his face. What are you going to do with us? Samuel remained silent for a long moment. This was the question that had defined the last 25 years of his life. The question that would determine not only his brother's fate, but what kind of man he had become. I'm going to save our tribe, he finally said. Running Bear and Grey Wolf looked at him with surprise and relief. But not for you, Samuel continued. I'm going to save it for the 400 innocent people who had nothing to do with your betrayal, for the children who don't deserve to pay for your sins, for the elders who guard our history and traditions. He stood up again, and this time there was an almost royal authority in his posture. As for you two, you're going to spend the rest of your lives working to undo the evil you did. You're going to dedicate every day you have left to serve our tribe, to protect our culture, to ensure that no child goes through what I went through. Samuel paused, and his next sentence was said with a mixture of sadness and forgiveness that touched everyone's heart in the office. And maybe if you really change, if you really learn what family means, maybe one day I can call you brothers again. Running Bear and Grey Wolf couldn't stop crying. 25 years of guilt, remorse, and desperate searching had culminated in this moment of brutal truth and unexpected forgiveness. Little Eagle, said Running Bear, using his brother's real name for the first time in decades, how can you forgive us after everything? Samuel looked out the window where the sun was setting over the lands he now owned. Because I learned that carrying hatred is like carrying burning coals, hoping to throw them at someone. You're the first to get burned. And because, he paused, because our father, Chief Standing Bear, taught me that a warrior's true strength isn't in his ability to destroy, but in his ability to build. He turned to his brothers one last time. Now go, return to our tribe. Tell them the lands are safe, and tell them that Little Eagle has finally come home. As Running Bear and Grey Wolf left the office, transformed by the experience, Samuel remained alone for a moment. Joshua entered shortly after, finding his friend looking thoughtfully at the horizon. How do you feel? Asked Joshua. Samuel smiled, and for the first time in 25 years, it was a smile completely free of pain. I feel free, he said. Finally free. And what are you going to do now? Samuel picked up a paper and began writing a letter to his contacts in Washington, starting the process that would save his tribe. "Now I'm going to do what I should have always done," he said. "I'm going to use my power to protect those who can't protect themselves. I'm going to be the leader my father always knew I could be, and I'm going to ensure that Little Eagle's story is remembered not as a story of revenge, but as a story of transformation." He looked one last time out the window, where the stars were beginning to appear in the night sky. And maybe one day, other children who have been betrayed and abandoned can look at my story and understand that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes for those who never stop believing in the light. Years later, when historians wrote about Samuel Whitehorse, they called him the Comanche king who saved Texas, but those who knew him personally always remembered him as Little Eagle, the boy who transformed the greatest betrayal of his life into the greatest victory of his soul. And in a small reservation in Texas, protected forever by Samuel Whitehorse's influence and generosity, Comanche children still hear the story of the boy who was sold for $600 and grew up to be worth $2 million. But more importantly, they learn that a person's real value can never be measured in money, and that forgiveness is the most powerful weapon a human heart can possess. Running Bear and Grey Wolf kept their promise. They dedicated the rest of their lives to serving the tribe, becoming examples of redemption and genuine change. And the last time Samuel saw them, at their father Chief Standing Bear's funeral, they were finally able to embrace as true brothers, united not by the blood they shared, but by the forgiveness they chose. Little Eagle's story became legend, but more than that, it became hope. Hope that no matter how deep our fall, there's always a chance to rise. Hope that justice, though sometimes slow, always finds a way. And hope that love and forgiveness are more powerful than any destructive force this world can offer us. And so, under the eternal stars that always guided his path, Samuel Whitehorse built a legacy that transcended wealth and power, leaving behind a simple but revolutionary truth. The greatest victory is not destroying your enemies, but transforming them into family.